Hello everyone, and welcome to the Labo DJ for this video specially dedicated to HDR10+. On the program, a brief reminder of some basic concepts to better understand how HDR10+ works. We will then see the key steps in the creation of this format, its technical characteristics, and its ecosystem. Then I will do a workshop to show you the differences between HDR10 and HDR10+. And finally, we will meet Florian Friedrich from FF Pictures, who will detail the creation of an HDR10+ content. But first, opening title. Small precision before starting, I have talked a lot about Dolby on this channel and not much about HDR10+. That's why today I would like to restore the balance a little. I often hear the same thing, that one HDR format is superior to another, so I would like to set the record straight right away, and especially make you understand that HDR10+ and Dolby have totally different workflows and approach, but both provide you very good results. This video is not about comparing them and saying which one is the best. We can consider that HDR10+ is an evolution of HDR10. But to understand how HDR10+ works, I would like to remind you some basic notions. HDR allows you to display a richer image. This image has particular characteristics. First of all, the gamut. It characterizes the set of colors that can be displayed by a system. You see here integrity of the colors that an eye can perceive. On our HD TVs, the gamut used is Rec. 709. It covers 38.7% of human vision. For the cinema, the gamut used is DCI-P3, which covers 41.7% of human vision. And for HDR, the gamut used is BT2020, which covers 57.2% of human vision. Beware, all HDR content does not use the full BT2020. Most of movies are still graded in P3, so you have P3 encapsulated in BT2020. You should also know that most display systems, whether professional or consumer, are not capable of displaying the full BT2020. The other important feature of HDR is the transfer curve. That is what will allow the conversion of the electrical signal into an image in order to display it on your display system. For HD content, we talk about gamma curve. It can be gamma 2.2, 2.4, or curve BT1886. For HDR, we talk about curve EOTF-PQ ST2084. It's an absolute curve because it has the particularity of matching an encoded value to a display value. That is to say that if we filmed an element whose peak light is at 500 nits, we must find 500 nits to the display. The PQ curve can restore values up to 10,000 nits. For now, in 2021, no TV is able to display such values. Majority of OLED max selling between 8 and 900 nits, but are generally closer to 600. Some LCD can display values up to 2500 nits. Finally, the last important characteristic is the color depth. A color image is composed of red, green and blue. For the contents that we watch in SDR as they are proposed to us in broadcast, we have 8 bits per channel, or about 16 millions of colors. The HDR contents are encoded with 10 bits per channel, or a little over 1 billion colors. This allows to display much more information in the gradients and shades of color. This reduces the staircase effects called bending. We will now address a crucial point. HDR content sometimes has light intensity and color information that can far exceed what your device are capable of reproducing. Let's take this picture. It has colors above Rec. 709 and P3 and has max light intensity above 4000 nits. What will happen if I watch this image on a TV that can only display 70% of BT2020 and whose maximum displayable light peak is only 600 nits? It will be necessary to transform the signal to adapt it to what your system can display. This operation is called tone mapping, and it's made possible by information content in the signal called metadata. We'll talk about static metadata and static tone mapping when we have an information that will apply a unique transformation on all the content, as is the case of HDR10. And we talk about dynamic metadata and dynamic tone mapping when the informations come from scene-by-scene analysis that will allow a much more accurate display and avoid making transformation on images that do not need it. This is what HDR10 Plus offers you. A movie is composed of different scenes with different light intensities. If we have very high intensities in a scene, the tone mapping generated from this information can have a strong impact on the image. Either the content will appear darker to avoid clipping and saturation in the highlights. Clipping is when you lose all the details in the highlight, as you can see here. Either the highlight will saturate to avoid darkening the dark areas. Either way, it's a matter of compromise. Keep in mind that tone mapping is dependent on two things: the characteristics of your display system and the characteristics of the content. If your content has the intensities that your display device is not capable of displaying, tone mapping will compress the signal to ensure a consistent display. But if the content does not have values that exceed what the device can display, there is no reason to have tone mapping. We can display the content without modifying it. It's case by case. As I told you before, we often hear that one standard is better than the other. So the only way to prove that one image is better than the other is to have the original graded master on a reference monitor and compare on a TV which HDR image is the closest. The one that will distort the basic artistic intent the least. Whether you feel that an image is more flattering if it's saturated with contrast or whatever is purely subjective. The question is, does it conform to what has been validated in the grading rule? This is the most important, to restore the image created by the authors in the most faithful way possible. And this is one of the weak points of HDR10. Indeed, there is no standardization of HDR10. Each manufacturer will add its own characteristic to offer you the most attractive image possible. This is called the post-process. It's sometimes very variable from a manufacturer or even from a model to another. HDR10 Plus and Filmmaker mode will ensure that the TV does not add any post-process and gives you the image as it was originally created. In 2016, the standard is filled with the SMPTE under the standard 2094-40. In August 2017, Fox, Panasonic and Samsung found the HDR10 Plus LCC. In February 2018, launch of the certification program, and 4 test centers are validated: TTA in Korea, Alio in Japan, Blue Focus in USA and TURT in China. July 2019, first TV HDR10 Plus launched jointly by Samsung and Panasonic. Then comes the updates. January 2019, rollout to mobile. September 2019, V1.3 with the support for amplifiers, soundbars and VP9 encoding for YouTube. January 2020, V1.4 with the support for DisplayPort, AV1 encoding and 8K. And finally, September 2020, V1.5, arrival of the first compatible video projector. For HDR10 Plus content creation, during mastering, the system gathers comprehensive luminous distribution statistics that describe all gray levels in each scene. The metadata includes the exact number of pixels in 9 different grayscale ranges. The data is then used to build a highly sophisticated customized tone mapping curve for each scene. This curve will be included in the metadata. This metadata will then be integrated into the video file, resulting in a HEVC H265 file. It will be HDR10 Plus with compatible devices and backward compatible to HDR10 other devices. Each consumer device will adjust this curve according to its capacity of luminosity. So HDR10 Plus will ensure that the dark areas are not buried, that the tints in the highlights are not altered, skin tones are preserved, and that bending and clipping are limited. Here are the technical characteristics of HDR10 Plus. The gamut used is BT2020. It's based on the PQ ST2084 curve. The compression is 420, definition is 2K, 4K and 8K, and mastering is done from content whose color depth is at least 10 bits, but it can be 12 or 16 bits. The final encoded file will be in 10 bits, and it can restore up to 10,000 nits. And as mentioned, the dynamic metadata are stored in a JSON text file that is included in the video file. HDR10 Plus is an open source standard, which accepts many codecs, and there is a membership program. Adopters must pay an annual fee, but it's not a paid license on each model of device. They will be able to access the certification program delivered by the test centers. HDR10 Plus, it's over 116 adapters across mobile, TV brands, content, OS, compatible components, and OTT services. Amongst the studio and content producers are 20th Century Fox, Lionsgate, Paramount Pictures, Universal, Viacom CBS, and Warner Bros. There are about 55 titles available in Blu-ray. HDR10 Plus is available on the following devices. For the audio-video receiver, we have Denon and Marantz. For Blu-ray players, we have Panasonic and Samsung. Mobiles, tablets, it's more than 100 devices spread over 12 brands, namely Asus, Black Shark, Fujitsu, Oppo, Lenovo, Meizu, Motorola, OnePlus, Realme, Samsung, Vivo, and Mai. About the display, it's more than 3000 models spread over 9 brands. Mai, Oppo, iSense, Lucoms, Metz, Panasonic, Samsung, TCL, TPV, and Toshiba. Regarding the OTT streaming services, HDR10 Plus is available on Google Play, iVi, Magenta TV, Megogo, Paramount Plus, Prime Video, Rakuten TV, Watcha, and YouTube. Note that on Prime, all 4K HDR content is systematically in HDR10 Plus, even if your TV does not systematically display the logo. For OTT devices, we find it on Amazon Fire Cubes, Fire Stick, Google Chromecast, and Roku streaming player. And here is a partial list of partners, whether providers for encoding or providers of SoC. I have prepared a small sequence with images that I took from artgrid.io. I made a little patchwork of dark scenes and scenes with light intensity up to 10,000 nits. This sequence I will broadcast it on a reference grading monitor, namely one of the most used monitor in HDR grading suite, the Sony HX310 4K HDR, a little jewel that costs several 10,000 euros. On this monitor is displayed the signal without tone mapping. So beware, this monitor is made for mastering content that does not exceed 1000 nits. It's also capable of displaying the full P3 gamut, but not the entire BT2020 gamut. So anything over 1000 nits will be clipped. On the other hand, I made sure that the signal is not clipped on my oscilloscope. That is to say that visually, on my monitor, which does not do tone mapping, the image is clipped. But if a TV has the ability to do tone mapping and roll off accurately, the information will be displayed correctly. The master of this sequence is a ProRes 4444 file in BT2020 ST2084 in 12 bits, which will be read from my MacBook connected to a AJA video box itself connected to the Sony monitor. This ProRes file has also been encoded in HEVC HDR10 by myself and in HDR10 Plus by Samsung USA. These two files have been loaded in a USB key that will be plugged on each TV. I also used the Blu-ray from Spears & Munsell. This one contains the same sequence in HDR10 and HDR10 Plus with intensity reaching to 10,000 nits and a tone mapper version in 1000 nits. I will broadcast my master sequence on the reference monitor and compare it to its HDR10 and HDR10 Plus version on a panel of 5 different TVs. I will then do the same with the Spears & Munsell clips. The goal is absolutely not to oppose the brands or the models, besides this will be hidden, just to show you how the tone mapping transforms the content according to the intensity. We can see on the first example that the display of the degradation is more precise on the HDR10 Plus version. This is not a question of a difference in the encoding, but rather the management of the highlight and saturation, which is much more precise here. Similarly, if we have more details in the clouds and saturation on the HDR10 Plus version. On this element from the Spears & Munsell Blu-ray, we have very high intensities. The tone mapping is very important. If you also look at the background, you can see that the trees are much more detailed and the color is better managed in the HDR10 Plus version. On this image of sky, the management of the saturation in the highlights is quite poorly rendered in HDR10. We are much more closer to the source displayed on the Sony monitor with the HDR10 Plus version. Same here, the image is so much more detailed in HDR10 Plus. We recover the color and detail in the clouds and orange tones. Look at the sun, it is much better drawn and we are much closer to the source displayed by the Sony in the HDR10 Plus version. This poppy field offers us a very saturated red and orange values, which are again much better rendered and closer to the source displayed on the HX310 with the HDR10 Plus version. We can see here that the management of the tone mapping is very complicated on this device with such high intensity on the image. the authors are very darkened compared to the HDR10 Plus version. As you can see, the contribution of dynamic tone mapping and the fact of disabling post-processing gives us an image more faithful to the source. Dynamic metadata are indeed very useful on devices that can't reproduce the full original light and colors intensities. But with the arrival of the new devices that can render up to 2000 nits, the use of dynamic metadata on content that do not exceed 1000 nits is less crucial. Now there is another element that will change the game: the viewing conditions. Today the viewing conditions have changed, and we often watch in bright environments. This will have a direct impact on your perception and on the quality of the image reproduction. HDR10 Plus Adaptive is the answer to this problem. A sensor will analyze the ambient brightness of the room, and thanks to the dynamic metadata, the image will be adapted to compensate for the scenes too dark in the room very bright. I was quite skeptical, but as you can see, it is rather effective, and again, dynamic metadata will play a very important role to allow you to render a much more faithful image depending on the brightness of your environment. I would like now to introduce you to my friend Florian Friedrich. He created the company FF Pictures that produces a lot of HDR contents for OTT or Ultra HD Blu-ray, and he also developed tools like HDR Master software that I've been using since almost the beginning of this channel. Florian helped me last year to produce and encode an HDR content that is available in all HDR flavors. You can download them at thelabodj.com. He is also an HDR10 Plus and Dolby Vision partner. So now let's welcome our guest.
Hi Jay, it's really nice talking to you. I think the test and demo footage from last year, which was provided for free, really made its way to enthusiasts and reviewers worldwide, and so let's keep on doing that. Also, I want to support the good work that you're doing in explaining HDR. Most likely I get ProRes files, 444 or 444XQ, which are quite solid in my opinion. They deliver a 12-bit and reasonable data rate. In very rare cases, I also get like TIFF sequences and DPX sequences. But basically, you know, it's important to have some sort of metadata defining the signal, and ProRes is a good format for that. In order to explain the process of creating and injecting HDR10 Plus into videos, I've created a short tutorial using my software.
The first step is to import your video into HDR Master. Now it's time to analyze the HDR signals. Therefore, we switch to the Tools window. Most convenient to analyze everything we may need is using the inspector on the left side. In this inspector module, you may enable or disable the items you want to have analyzed for the file. In our case, for adding HDR10 Plus dynamic metadata, we will checkmark MaxCLL MaxFall analysis and generate HDR10 Plus metadata. Now we start generating the information we need for adding dynamic metadata by pushing the Start Analysis button. Let's switch to the dynamic metadata module. It's the plus icon here, and you'll also immediately recognize the HDR10 Plus logo on the upper right. The diagram overlay in the picture shows us the dynamic metadata items for the current frame. Basically, you are able to see all the dynamic metadata values at once. Now, after HDR Master performed the initial analysis, there are a few additional files in the directory of the video. Now that we have all the info needed, we can take care of the scenes. It is crucial that the scene changes match the video content, as HDR10 Plus dynamic HDR metadata is designed to provide statistical information for each scene, helping the TV or projector to make the right tone mapping decisions. An even better way to start working with scenes is importing an EDL for the scene cut information. For this video clip, I simply exported the EDL from Resolve Timeline and imported it into HDR Master. Please be reminded that any time a new scene starts, changed metadata gets submitted to the display device. This means that if new metadata is triggering changes in the picture when there is no significant signal change, you may see some strange effects. Of course, we want to avoid such errors. Therefore, I advise checking every scene chain in detail. After checking and editing all scenes, we need to recalculate the statistics for each scene. Fortunately, HDR Master does not need to analyze the whole video again, as we already have statistic information for all frames from the previous analysis. You are now able to export the dynamic metadata as a separate JSON file and/or write it directly to your HEVC video. Please note, this does not re-encode the video. The video stream is copied and the dynamic metadata is added to it. It works for elementary streams as well as containers like MP4, and it's used by post-production facilities worldwide in order to add HDR10 Plus to HDR videos on Ultra HD Blu-ray or MP4 files for direct playback on television devices or supporting platforms like YouTube. For validating HDR10 Plus metadata, I recommend using an entry-class TV, as the resulting changes of the dynamic metadata are more significant when the display can't keep up with the image quality of the mastering environment. When writing the HDR10 Plus video, you can use the previously analyzed MaxCLL and MaxFall values and add them to the file. That's it, you're done. Have fun with your HDR10 Plus video.
Both formats can use the exact same signal. We are using BT2020 as a container. We're using the PQ EOTF. Basically, dynamic metadata gets added to that signal. This metadata is specified in SMPTE 2094 and basically is there to narrow the gap in between the quality capabilities of a mastering monitor and the quality capabilities of your consumer device. In case of HDR10 Plus, we have a situation where this metadata is only statistical metadata, allowing the TV, to make decisions for the tone mapping and narrow the gap in between the mastering monitor and the consumer TV. That works with dynamic metadata on a scene-by-scene basis. I think it is a good idea to deliver the signal that was actually fed to the mastering monitor, trying to deliver that exact same signal to the consumers at home, and then only using the dynamic metadata in order to close the gap, the quality gap. Ideally, you have a situation where your TV comes close to the capabilities of the mastering monitor and you don't need this dynamic metadata. On a production side, a Dolby workflow is usually done within a P3 container. So everything is basically created in full range and in a P3 container until you have some intermediate file, some like IMF file with all the metadata that is included in the Dolby Vision format. From there, you create other deliverables. The Dolby encoding engine is then using this P3 full range signal in order to map it to a BT2020 legal range signal. It could be mapped to a lower luminance, a base layer up to a specific luminance, and the enhancement layer to another luminance. And I'm using that words on purpose because there's tone mapping going on. Tone mapping, in my opinion, can be avoided and it's not always necessary. So when I encode HDR10, just regular HDR10, that's fastest. That can be done in like a day. Second fastest is HDR10 Plus, where the movie has to be split into the scenes, and each scene has to be analyzed for creating the metadata. The longest time to encode is actually with Dolby Vision. You have to see that there might be 10 terabytes of data during the encoding process. And even with those fast computers, the process can take like a week. And now you can imagine that after a week, you find something in the QC and you have to correct it. that can be a real pain. So I'm hoping that Dolby Vision encoding, at least for Ultra HD Blu-ray, is getting faster. If I have to deliver for OTT only, Dolby Vision is as fast as the other formats. I'm rendering basically an MXF file in an IMF container, but you know, that's quite quick. So a couple of hours after the movie is done. There's also the case of hybrid productions, where after the Dolby Vision part is done, I'm adding HDR10 plus metadata. So it actually has both HDR10 plus and Dolby Vision in one encoding. You can't say, oh, this format is better than the other. It doesn't make sense. I've seen situations where reviewers looked at the HDR10 and 10 plus signal of the disc and compared it with the Dolby Vision signal on the disc. But unless you have deep knowledge about the workflow, you can't really compare it. And my point here is basically saying that signal is the same. There is, you know, please don't let us start with, you know, this 12-bit nonsense on consumer TVs. It doesn't work at this point. You know, the enhancement layer, it's good ideas, no question about it. The differences that people are seeing come from the quality differences in the TVs. Please don't judge, you know, HDR10 plus is better, Dolby Vision is better. It just doesn't make sense. And
what actually is a mastering monitor, and how is it that such a tiny device with only 32 inches of diagonal costs 40,000 euros? When creating HDR content, it comes down to the finest nuances. Every adjustment to the controller, no matter how small, must be exactly reflected on the display. A mastering monitor must reproduce shadow areas in a differentiated, contrasted manner and without color distortion. And it doesn't matter whether the rest of the image is light or dark. Bright areas, on the other hand, must appear with the luminosity of the signal. In addition, for colors, it is very important to show not only precision and gradation up to 12-bit accuracy, but also color volume, meaning the capability of the display to show saturated colors in bright and dark areas of the image. A good mastering monitor does not burn in. Station logos, test patterns and similar elements do not leave any traces in the picture. In case of this Sony HX310, it is an LCD monitor with two LCD layers, one behind the other, and a constantly strong LED background light leading to a luminance of up to 1000 nit per square meter. And since one LCD layer is responsible for dimming at the pixel level, there are consistently high contrast values of up to 1,000,000 to 1. No television today is capable of keeping up with that. A good television ideally comes very close to a mastering monitor, which means it has similar image properties. The Neo QLED technology is a further development of Samsung's QLED panel, which uses new quantum mini LEDs as a light source. On the other hand, we have a 48-inch OLED TV with self-emitting pixels, of course. And in the middle we have our reference, the previously discussed mastering monitor, and I've already taken the time to make a detailed comparison. No TV can do what our mastering monitor does. On the other hand, every inch of diagonal is important when you're dealing with HDR and 4K images. Incidentally, there are also TVs in post-production houses. These TVs are used as client monitors. It's for preview purposes. They don't represent the signal in a binding manner. It's not like the mastering monitor. It's not for serious content creation. This OLED is one of these client monitors, and it has a generally very good image quality with deep blacks even from the side. The colors are very accurate in the medium brightness range and can also be calibrated. On the other hand, the device shows weaknesses in terms of color volume, where depending on the image content, large saturated color areas do not shine with excessively high brightness or appear desaturated. Burn-in effects are also possible, and if the image is to be HDR Snow White, it will instead lose its brightness. Because we have a highly saturated and bright color burst pattern on screen, you can see that these areas are significantly dimmer than on the reference monitor or in the QLED TV. The Neo QLED TV does not have these weaknesses of a significantly reduced color volume, and in particular, bright scenes can be reproduced at a very good level. In many situations, the TV presents an image that comes very close to that of the mastering monitor. Its disadvantage is the not quite as deep black in situations where dark images are combined with bright highlights. Dynamic metadata is helping modern TVs, scene by scene, to make tone mapping adjustments in order to get close to the impression on the mastering monitor. TVs with lower capabilities in terms of luminance and color volume highly benefit from scene-by-scene dynamic metadata. So this scene-by-scene dynamic metadata is helping those TVs in order to make dynamic tone mapping decisions in order to get closer to the image impression on the mastering. If your TV is already close to the capabilities of a mastering monitor, the need of dynamic metadata is a lot lower.
Well, Florian, thank you very much for that great amount of information and all the time you took for helping me creating this video.
Thank you for listening and spreading the word, Jay. I'm hoping that many people will see this and maybe visit my website FFDE or my YouTube channel and see more videos. Anyway, thumbs up for good HDR. Goodbye.
This video is now over. I hope you enjoyed it and that you've learned a lot of things. As always, I had a lot of help for creating this video and I would like to thank a lot of people. First of all, Samsung US team with Bill Mendel, Suzy Yoon, Steve Larson, Elisabeth Morgenstern, Samsung France, special thanks to Olivier Boissard, Maureen Henry, Alexis Rollin, Mathieu Besnard, and Guillaume de Keating Art from Samsung London. Of course, once again, Florian Friedrich for his precious help, and also Anna Doublé from Sony France for the loan of the HX310. It did not escape you that Sony is not an HDR10 Plus partner, but they were interested in the project and they play the game, so I will really like to thank them. I would also like to thank Jean-Pierre Fournier and PostLogic team for helping me with the loan of Aja equipment, and finally Yassine Akaderi, Alan and Carl from Boulanger for their great help. This was a lot of hard work to provide you this content, so if you enjoyed it, feel free to share it and to subscribe to the channel. Well, see you soon with new content. Until then, take care of yourself. Bye.